Oh yeah, we are back, baby! Welcome to Friday Night Gamez, everybody. I'm JComX. It has been a hot minute since we last dipped our toes into liquid crystal luxury, but don't you worry, because tonight we've got two series for the price of one. First, we've got the Super Color series, featuring one of the sleekest looking Game & Watch designs ever, while the Microversus series brings competitive multiplayer to the iconic handhelds. We've got Mario, Donkey Kong, Punch-Out, and more, so sit back and hold on to your butts as we take a look at two of the most unique series of Game & Watches yet featured on Friday Night Gamez. It's time to take a look at the Super Color and Microversus series. Allow me to set the stage. It's 1984 and the American video game industry is still reeling following its obliteration the prior year, aptly known as the video game crash of 1983. Meanwhile, Nintendo's newly released home console, the Famicom, is stealing the hearts and homes of Japanese consumers, while their incredibly lucrative line of electronic handheld Game & Watches is now 3 years old. While the Game & Watch has enjoyed steady success both in Japan and Europe, America's reaction to the electronic devices was,
"What the hell is even that?"
Nintendo of America saw the explosive popularity of Game & Watch in Japan, and in early 1983, with dollar signs in their eyes, they showed the revolutionary games in the Consumer Electronics Show and proceeded to lose millions of dollars. While the Game & Watch was an innovative and cheap use of LCD technology when it was first introduced, by 1983 countless imitators and knockoffs had already made their way overseas and Americans were unimpressed. Still, Gunpei Yokoi and his team of engineers at R&D1 forged ahead, determined not to be outdone by their rivals at R&D2 with their fancy new Famicom. After all, Game & Watch had brought Nintendo to new heights and helped fund the Famicom's creation. And before we go any further, if you haven't seen my other Game & Watch videos up to this point, you should go check them out now in my Game & Watch playlist. That way you can get caught up with the story so far. Link in the description down below. Now, the Game & Watch is no stranger to color. The Gold series, the second line ever produced, introduced simple color backgrounds to give more character and life to their games. From then on, Game & Watch continued adding more and more elaborate backgrounds, culminating in the wonderfully realized tabletop and panorama screen series, which feature some of the most creative and best-looking uses of LCD technology yet. These stunning and colorful displays put other tabletop arcades of the time to shame. So for their next series, R&D1 went back to the traditional single-screen design, but upgraded it with stylish, long and slender casing, and rather than having a dash of color here or there, the entire screen was full of color. The Super Color series distinguishes itself from prior Game & Watch incarnations by prominently featuring 4 colors: purple, green, blue, and red, with gameplay focused heavily around these colors. Rather than appearing opaque, as with other Game & Watches, the characters and objects in the Super Color series actually appear in the various 4 colors.
How neat is that?
And what makes these color screens so different from the color on the other Game & Watches? I don't actually really know. If we take the Game & Watch apart, it pretty much looks exactly like every other Game & Watch. The color seems to come from a standard color filter. That's an interesting effect, but it's not exactly groundbreaking. For me, the real draw to the series is the casing. The Super Color series stands out a lot from the other Game & Watches. The tall, shiny silver design just looks sassy. Starting off the Super Color series, we've got Spitball Sparky, releasing right at the top of the year on February 7th, 1984. Spitball Sparky is Breakout. They crucified him because he told the truth! Alright, that's a bit reductive, but Spitball Sparky is essentially a variation of Breakout. If you've ever played Breakout, and I'm sure you have, you'll understand the basic concept of Spitball Sparky. Nintendo is no stranger to Breakout either. They even ripped it off for arcades 6 years earlier with Block Fever in 1978. A year after that, they released the color TV game Block Kuzushi, a home console that played 6 versions of Breakout, part of their popular color TV game series. And who doesn't love Breakout anyway? Of course, it isn't just Breakout. Spitball Sparky brings its own spin and charm to the block-smashing classic. For starters, rather than a lifeless slab, you play as the adorable Sparky. And just look at this little fella. He's a tiny, armless guy who wears shoes and uses his massive trumpet-like mouth to blow the ball upwards. It is a tragedy that Sparky didn't make it into the upper echelons of Nintendo icons, because this is peak Nintendo design. Sparky's design could rival even the likes of beloved and universally loved characters like NZ and Nep Enut. Everyone knows those guys. Spitball Sparky also takes a more active approach to gameplay than Breakout. Rather than having the ball bounce automatically, you have to press the action button to make Sparky blow air, jettisoning the ball directly upwards rather than at an angle. Sparky can also blow on the ball anytime it's within the purple color range, rather than having to wait for it to come all the way to him. Naturally, the goal is to destroy all the blocks, which rewards you with points, but you have to move quickly because if you drop the ball, you lose a life. The higher blocks are more difficult to break, with the red ones at the top requiring 2 hits each. Clearing a stage will net you even more points, and as with many Game & Watch titles, after reaching 300 points you clear all your misses. Over time, obstacles will appear and bounce your ball back and prevent it from breaking the blocks. And unlike Breakout, your ball does not destroy blocks from above. The game gets increasingly harder as time goes on, and it continues indefinitely until you lose all 3 of your lives. As always, Game A is the standard game, while Game B is more difficult with a higher speed and flashing blocks. Spitball Sparky is a fun little time killer, as all good Game & Watches should be. Electronic Games, one of the earliest and most popular video game magazines from the 80s, even gave it a pretty positive review, emphasizing the color screen technology. For me, the highlights are definitely the casing and Sparky himself. I give it 3 out of 6 proboscis monkeys. Releasing mere weeks after Spitball Sparky, we have our second game in the Super Color duology, Crab Grab. This is one I've never played before, so I'm gonna start off by checking the manual. Operate Mr. Grab to push up demon crabs. What the f***? Push up and clear the top row of all demon crabs to clear the display. What demon crabs? Oh, don't worry, the demon crab lore is just the beginning of this madness. What the hell is going on here? I'm gonna be honest, I played this game for a long time and I still don't fully understand it. You push demon crabs, up and off the screen, and the same number of crabs will enter the screen from below. Your goal is to clear the top screen of all demon crabs, but the crabs from the bottom will slowly rise from the depths of Satan and try to claim Mr. Grab's immortal soul. I think my brain just has a hard time understanding this type of game. Like, I get what I need to do, but it seems like sometimes the crabs immediately start rising from the bottom, and other times they move slowly. I can't seem to figure it out. Once again, you have 3 lives, after which it's game over, and reaching 300 points clears all of your misses. Game B plays faster. Right from the start, you have demon crabs nipping at your ass, but for some reason I actually had an easier time understanding Game B, and I started having a pretty good time with it. Something about the speed of Game B just makes it make a little bit more sense than Game A for me. You'll also notice that one of the big visual differences between Crab Grab and Spitball Sparky is that, rather than the colors being stacked on top of each other, in Crab Grab they're used to separate the demon crabs into columns. Crab Grab is weird, but the gameplay is incredibly unique, which I find very refreshing after playing dozens of Game & Watches. I was ready to write Crab Grab off, but I was totally wrong. As a character, Mr. Grab doesn't hold a candle to the illustrious Sparky, but not many of us do. Crab Grab is plenty of fun and very much worth checking out. And that's it for the Super Color series. Clearly, R&D1 felt 2 games was enough to exhaust all possible game concepts with this series because they immediately moved on to something else. These are 2 solid games, but even I have to admit that there's only so much the theme of color can bring to the table. In the months following the Super Color series, the Famicom continued increasing in popularity. At the same time, Nintendo was releasing its Versus system in Japan and the US. This was basically an arcade that would play ported versions of Famicom games, and it sold pretty well, especially in America. Both the Famicom and the Versus system had a heavy emphasis on competitive multiplayer. I can only assume that Gunpei Yokoi saw the success of these systems and wanted to prove that the Game & Watch was also capable of 2-player fun. Because in July of 1984, Nintendo released their next line of Game & Watch, the Micro Versus series. As the title suggests, the main gimmick of these games is multiplayer.
Did somebody just say multiplayer?
Get out! Get the f*** out!
Jesus, sorry, I didn't know you were such a fucking dick.
Alright, let's be totally fair here and point out that the Micro Versus series isn't actually the first introduction to Game & Watch multiplayer. As far back as the very first batch of Game & Watch, we had Judge. Game B allowed for 2 people to play against each other, and therefore it's the first multiplayer Game & Watch. Mario Bros., which arrived a year prior to the Microversus series, also allowed for multiplayer, with the second player being able to take control of Luigi. So it's not fair to say that the Microversus series introduced multiplayer, but it was the first line to dedicate itself entirely to the concept. Yet another radical departure from the traditional Game & Watch design, the Microversus series features a long horizontal screen with two controllers, ideal for playing side by side with a friend. The controllers themselves are very simple. They're small and round, each with a D-pad to move and a single action button. I really like this design. It's very distinct from previous Game & Watches and really shows off Gunpei Yokoi's chops as a toy maker. And the controller designs being so simple make for an easy pick-up and play experience with a friend.
I used to hate taking long with my parents. Nothing to look at but the backs of their and the side of the road. But then I got this Spitball Sparky game. It's got great color, and it's challenging to can't let them think you're having fun.
Spitball Sparky. Nintendo.
Battling its way in as the first Microversus series game, we have Boxing, which released in July 1984, only a few months after Nintendo released its innovative arcade classic, Punch-Out! Because of how popular Punch-Out was in the US, Nintendo even rebranded Boxing as Punch-Out when it came overseas. Both Boxing and Punch-Out were likely in development at the same time, and while it hasn't been confirmed whether the arcade game directly influenced Boxing's creation, I'm gonna say 100% f***ing did! Whether the games are truly related or not, don't you dare try to tell me they aren't! The games don't really share a whole lot in common, other than being about the same sport. In Boxing, you duke it out, either with a CPU in Game A or against a friend in Game B for boxing supremacy. Your moves arsenal consists of 3 options: punch, block, or dodge. To punch, you simply press the action button. You can press up or down on the D-pad to select if you want to punch at their head or at their body. To block, you don't press anything, although you have to move your gloves to where your opponent is punching or they'll still hit you. And finally, pressing backward on the D-pad allows you to dodge, which momentarily keeps you out of arm's reach of your opponent. Both players have an energy meter at the top of their screen, and landing a hit will lower your opponent's meter by 1. If their meter reaches 0, they'll be pushed backwards to the edge of the ring, and if you can lower their meter again, it'll win you the round. But you've got to be quick, because after a period of time, the Gong Man, who is actually Phone Bone from the comic Bone, look at him, that's Bone from Bone, you can't convince me that's not Bone, will ring the gong and both fighters will reset to the middle of the ring. This is good if you're on the back foot, but annoying if you've got the upper hand. If you can somehow win 5 rounds, then you'll officially net yourself a knockout. Game A is a single player where you can test your mettle against a cold, calculating CPU, while Game B allows you the thrill of battling against another warm-blooded creature, much like yourself. In single-player mode, the computer starts off with only 2 bars of health, but after 5 knockouts, that is, a minimum of 20 rounds, the opponent's health will increase by 1, up to a maximum of 5, the same as you. I don't really recommend trying this because it takes a really long time and the gameplay becomes very repetitive. It's pretty ridiculous that you have to play at least 80 rounds of this game before you can face an opponent with equal health. Trust me, I did it, and I no longer feel anything. But of course, the main draw of any of the Microversus series is the multiplayer, and here the game fares much better. Having a friend to play with instantly makes the game more fun and dynamic, and it switches from trying to exploit the mechanics of the computer into a mind game between you and your opponent. With only 3 moves to choose from, it becomes a little bit of a rock, paper, scissors situation. One of the most surprising things I learned about boxing while doing research was that this is actually not the first LCD boxing game of this style. An incredibly similar game was released in 1981 by Becasue, called the Boxing Game Calculator, or BG-15. Not only was this a calculator, alarm, and watch, it also had a single-player boxing game, which shares many of the simple game mechanics as Game & Watch Boxing. Of course, the Game & Watch LCD display is superior, and it also allows for multiplayer, but this was still a cool little discovery. And the legacy of boxing doesn't stop there. A few months after Boxing's release, Nintendo released Urban Champion for the Famicom and Arcade Versus system. Urban Champion is a relatively obscure game that features the exact same gameplay as Boxing, but with the Famicom's much improved 8-bit graphics. Yo, I f***ing love Donkey Kong 3! Such an underrated early Nintendo arcade game, which I find endlessly replayable when I want that space shooter fix. It's fun, frustrating, and fabulous. So imagine my joy when I learned that a port of Donkey Kong 3 is also the next game in our Microversus series. Well, port is a rather generous description, because Donkey Kong 3 for the Game & Watch is really a completely new game, more of a sequel rather than a remake or a conversion. Stay Stanley and Donkey Kong are back at it again, but this time Donkey Kong has taken up arms and has gotten a spray bottle of his own. The two duke it out from opposite ends of Stanley's greenhouse, trying to spray the Buzzbee in the center toward each other until it stings one of you. There's a constant drip of insecticide on either side of the greenhouse, which you can use to refill your spray bottle and give you more ammunition. Of course, Game A is the single player where you take control of Stanley and fight off the computer-controlled Donkey Kong, while in Game B, player 2 gets to control the Great Ape. The game continues indefinitely until a player loses 3 lives. Man, it's probably because I love Donkey Kong 3, but the art in this one is fantastic. Look at Stanley, he is absolutely glowing. Donkey Kong? It goes without saying. On a gameplay level, the Donkey Kong 3 is a mixed bag. Conceptually, this is a great way to translate the idea of the Donkey Kong 3 arcade game into a multiplayer experience on the Game & Watch. But in practice, using a spray bottle to push the Buzzbees towards each other removes the direct control you have to win the game. This led to more frustration in the game than with other Micro Versus series games. I don't think it's a bad game, and after a while you can kind of begin to predict the patterns of the Buzzbees, which allows for more strategy, but overall I'm not a huge fan of this gameplay. In the multiplayer mode, rather than having your points endlessly climb upwards, both you and your opponent are given a timer that ticks down anytime the Buzzbees are on your side of the greenhouse. When the timer reaches 0, you'll lose a life, in addition to any of the lives lost from being stung by a Buzzbee. For me, this does a lot to improve the fun of the game, as it gives you additional objectives rather than simply trying to achieve a high score and not die. As a multiplayer Game & Watch conversion of the original Donkey Kong 3 arcade game, I think Donkey Kong 3 is about as good as it can be. But unfortunately, I just don't think that the mechanics lend themselves very well to this format. Which is a damn shame, because our determined little fumigator deserves better. Stanley, I love you, come back! For now, Donkey Kong 3 is a worthy, if not flawed, entry into the Stanley the Bugman saga. The boys are back! For the final installment in the Micro Versus series, Mario and Donkey Kong's longtime rivalry is once again ignited in Donkey Kong Hockey, releasing at the tail end of 1984, only a few months after Donkey Kong 3. Over the years, we have seen Mario and Donkey Kong play sports together many times. If there is a Mario sports game, you can guarantee our well-dressed Simeon will be right there with him. But Donkey Kong Hockey for the Game & Watch is the first ever time Mario and Donkey Kong face off in any sports game. It is a seminal moment, a Nexus event if you will. Fellow Nintendo freaks take note because this is important! So how does this amazingly transformative event hold up as a game? Well, unlike Punch-Out and Donkey Kong 3, it's not based on a pre-existing game, so obviously it f***ing sucks! Or at least that's what I thought going into it, but it turns out I've got a stupid fucking poopy head because Donkey Kong Hockey actually rules! This is by far my favorite of the Micro Versus series games when it comes to gameplay. Essentially, Donkey Kong Hockey is Pong on steroids. You're trying to bounce the puck back and forth into each other's goals, but you got all this shit in the middle that makes the gameplay super spicy. First off, there's a referee who will occasionally come out into the middle of the rink and bounce the puck back towards whoever hit it. Secondly are these crazy spots!
No, I mean seriously, that's what they're called in the manual.
That speed up the ball and change its trajectory. And finally, you can choose to let the puck bounce off of you, or you can try whacking it with your microscopic hockey stick. Seriously, just look at those tiny little things. Why are they so small? This risks you missing and having the puck go into your goal, but if you hit it, it shoots the puck much faster towards the opponent. Additionally, you can move anywhere on your side of the rink, which gives you an amount of control that is rarely seen in a Game & Watch. All of this allows for a much more involved and complex game experience that I really appreciate, which is hilarious because this is basically just Pong. Aside from the background, the visuals are also top-notch. The ice rink is pretty standard, but Donkey Kong and Mario's absolutely terrified expressions are wonderfully rendered here, with Mario especially looking more like we're used to seeing him than in many other Mario-based Game & Watches. With such a stellar single player, it's little wonder that the multiplayer only adds to the fun by allowing a friend to join in on the game, making it feel like a spin on the classic game of air hockey. Needless to say, this is an excellent entry into the Game & Watch library. If you're going to play any of the Micro Versus series, I would highly recommend checking out Donkey Kong Hockey. Sadly, Donkey Kong Hockey marks the very last Game & Watch to feature Donkey Kong. Our lovable ape helped boost the Game & Watch into one of the most prolific handhelds in Japan and Europe, selling millions of copies of his debut multi-screen offering, as well as countless renditions of Donkey Kong Jr. and a few interesting and unique entries. But by the end of 1984, after Donkey Kong 3 failed to capture the arcade-goers' imaginations, Donkey Kong was slowly being eclipsed by his arch-rival Mario. Aside from a few obscure games, re-releases of his previous arcade titles, and the occasional cameo, Donkey Kong wouldn't really see the spotlight for a long time after this. The Famicom was taking Japan by storm, and Nintendo's focus was shifting to developing games almost exclusively for the console, which already had 4 Donkey Kong games. For our goofy grinning gorilla, it was time to say goodbye. At least for now. Nintendo's focus towards the Famicom also meant that the Game & Watch's heyday was also finally over. There would still be a dozen or so Game & Watches released in the following years, and a couple of them were even extremely successful, but overall the Game & Watch was entering its twilight years. In America, Spitball Sparky had its own dedicated commercial, part of Nintendo's "I'm extremely bored, so I guess I might as well play a Game & Watch" ad campaign, which flopped. Still, both the Super Color and Microversus series have fantastic designs and interesting game concepts. My personal highlights for the series are probably Spitball Sparky and Donkey Kong Hockey, but all of the games are worth playing for avid Game & Watch enthusiasts like myself. The Super Color games are solid with fun visuals, while adding the multiplayer definitely benefits the Microversus series and helps it stand out amongst the sprawling Game & Watch catalog. It's awesome to see that R&D 1 still had plenty of creativity and new ideas left even after all these years. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on these games. Do you hate Spitball Sparky? Do we have any Donkey Kong 3 apologists in the audience? I love hearing from you, so let me know in the comments what you think about these games. Don't forget to slap the subscribe button right on the ass because that wraps it up for our retrospective on the Super Color and Microversus series Game & Watch. I have got so much more in store for you. Next episode, we're going to be taking a look at an often overlooked yet extremely influential game in Nintendo's history, tennis. I know what you're thinking. Are you fucking serious right now? But don't worry, you have no idea. You are not going to want to miss this episode, so make sure you subscribe and tune in next time so we can talk about tennis. And we cannot forget about this week's subscriber shoutouts. These shoutouts go to Dannyland Studio, Playvectrix, and Robot Fist's Revenge 3288. Thank you for your awesome comments. You guys rock!